I had been warned. Not by authorities or scholars, no, their cautionary words had the weightless quality of bureaucracy, but by whispers in the taverns at the edge of the known world. They called it the Hollow Peaks. Jagged, black-spined mountains that scraped the sky like broken teeth. Some said the peaks themselves were alive, that they listened. Others said the air inside the mountains carried voices. Not human voices, not animal voices, but something older, something that could see your thoughts and speak them back to you. I should have turned back the moment I saw the first ridge, a silhouette of sheer stone clawing at the clouds, but I was a fool drunk on curiosity. Maps offered little, and townspeople murmured their warnings with quickened eyes and lowered heads. The air here tasted of iron and ash, and even before I climbed, I could feel the echo of my own heartbeat ricocheting in my chest. The first night I camped near the base of the peaks, the wind shifted and I heard it. At first, I thought it was the rustling of branches, or maybe my own breath, but then the sound formed words. My words. You are alone. I froze. The fire before me flickered, and I thought perhaps it was a trick of my tired mind. I spoke aloud, testing myself. Who's there? The answer came not from shadow, but from within the mountain itself. You know me. Every rational thought fled. My teeth ground together. I could feel my pulse hammering like a drum of warning. By the time I realized the voice had perfectly mimicked my own tone, I knew I was no longer just walking into a mountain. I was walking into a trap, a mind-eating labyrinth forged from sound and fear. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every crackle of fire, every gust of wind, even the soft scurry of animals far below the tree-line seemed to transform into my own voice calling back at me, whispering my secrets, mocking my courage. And yet, I could not leave. I wanted answers. I wanted to see the heart of this nightmare. The next morning, I climbed. The peaks loomed closer, their blackened faces like jagged wounds against the gray sky. I found the path slick with moss, and the air grew heavier, saturated with a metallic tang that clung to my throat. Each step upward felt as though I were entering a different world. A world that was less earth, more echo. Started slowly, a whistle at the corner of my hearing. Then laughter. Then voices I could not place, some human, some something else entirely. And then, inevitably, my own voice, speaking thoughts I had never uttered aloud, trailing behind me in an eerie imitation of reality. Turn back, it said. No one will find you here. And the most horrifying thing was not that the voice knew my thoughts. It was that I believed it. By nightfall, I found a narrow ledge to shelter upon. The wind screamed through the peaks like the cries of the damned, and I could swear the mountain itself was breathing, shifting, waiting. That night, sleep did not come at all. Only echoes, and I realized, slowly and with growing terror, that these echoes were not just imitating me. They were learning me. They were shaping themselves around my fears, feeding on my doubts, coaxing me closer to the edge, and I didn't know if I could resist. Somewhere, deeper in the peaks, something waited, and it knew my name. The night in the hollow peaks stretched endlessly, or perhaps my mind stretched it. I could no longer tell. Every shadow was a potential threat, every gust of wind a whisper. The fire I had managed to coax from damp twigs sputtered and hissed like a living thing, mirroring my own panic. I had wanted answers, and now I was getting them in fragments, echoes that gnawed at the edges of reason. It began with footsteps, soft, deliberate, following me across the ledge as I huddled close to a rock face. I told myself it was the mountain settling, or an animal, or perhaps the exhaustion playing tricks on my senses. But the rhythm matched mine. My own heartbeat perfectly mirrored. I spoke aloud, as if speaking could anchor me to reality. I'm awake. You cannot fool me. The response was instant. My own voice, smoother now, not quite mine but not quite alien either. We are awake. We are with you. I wanted to run, but the ledge was narrow, slick with frost. One misstep and I would plummet into a void too deep to measure. Yet the voice called to me, seductive, whispering the darkest fragments of my thoughts. My failures, my regrets, the secrets I had buried so deep I had forgotten them. And then something moved beyond the ledge. I saw it, a shape, fleeting and impossible, darker than shadow, yet outlined in a faint, sickly luminescence. It mimicked my posture, mirrored my expression. When I crouched, it crouched. When I froze, it froze. My mind screamed for me to look away, but I could not. Curiosity had become a chain. I stumbled backward, scraping my knuckles against jagged stone. My breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, and then I heard it not through my ears, but inside my skull. A chorus of echoes, dozens, perhaps hundreds, all repeating my thoughts, twisting them. Fall, jump, end it. We know you. I could feel the mountain's hunger, its desire not just to imitate, but to consume. I clenched my teeth and forced myself to focus. There had to be a pattern, a rhythm, a weakness. My eyes roamed the cliffside, desperate for a path that would not betray me. And then I saw it. A faint trail of worn stone, narrow and winding, leading higher into the heart of the peaks. I began to climb, each step more precarious than the last. The wind tore at my clothes and hair, carrying whispers that promised relief if I only stepped closer to the void. I could feel my sanity fraying, thread by thread, as the echoes whispered in languages I had never learned but somehow understood. And then I saw them. Shadows along the ridge, not moving, not yet, but aware. I sensed their eyes before I saw them. They were waiting for me, patient, knowing. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the mountain had already claimed me. My legs moved of their own accord, climbing toward the unknown, toward the voices that had become a part of me. As the sun dipped behind jagged spires, the world shrank to the narrow ledge, the wind, and the whispers. I realized, with a horror that froze my blood, that the echoes were no longer imitating me. They were anticipating me. I reached a point where the path ended abruptly, a sheer drop into darkness. The wind whipped past, carrying a multitude of voices now, chanting, coaxing, mocking. Jump! We know you. Jump! I pressed my back against the cold stone, heart hammering, and tried to force the voices away. But one voice, clear and singular, rose above the others, softer than a sigh but sharper than a knife. Only by facing us will you survive. I didn't know what us meant. I didn't know if I could survive. But the trail upward, into the darkness of the peaks, still beckoned. And I knew, as surely as the wind tore at my soul, that turning back was no longer an option. The echoes had begun to hunt me. I spent the night pressed against the cliff face, shivering not from cold but from a terror that seemed to seep into my bones. The wind screamed, but underneath it, I could hear the voices, soft, persistent, coaxing. I wanted to cover my ears, but they weren't outside me. They were inside me, threading themselves into my thoughts, turning my fears into shapes I could almost see. Sleep came in fitful, horrifying fragments. I dreamed of the mountain itself, alive and pulsing, its jagged teeth snapping closer with every heartbeat. I heard my own screams, only they were not mine. They were echoes, twisted, calling me by name with mockery and affection at once. I woke in a cold sweat, unsure if I was awake or still trapped in some nightmare the peaks had conjured. When I moved at dawn, the path ahead had changed. I swear it had shifted in the night, winding in ways that defied memory and logic. Rocks had moved, ledges vanished, and the mountain seemed almost to guide me, directing my steps with subtle shifts in wind and sound. Each echo now had intent, shaping my decisions, whispering half-truths, feeding my dread. I stopped near a jagged outcrop, convinced I had seen movement there, but when I approached, it was empty. Yet the voices whispered, "You saw her. She waits. She remembers." I had no idea who she was. A hallucination? A trap? The mountain's cruel joke? My mind was unraveling thread by thread. I tried to speak aloud to anchor myself. "I am alone. This is only a mountain." The echoes laughed. My own laugh, my own voice, but wrong, stretched and broken. And then I heard it, a soft sobbing. Clear, human, impossibly close. I froze. The sound came from the rocks themselves, as if the mountain had lungs and the wind exhaled grief. I followed it, drawn against every rational instinct, until I came to a narrow crevice. Inside, faint traces of smoke suggested a fire had burned there recently. And then movement. A figure, pale as bone, emerged from the shadows. It was impossibly thin, its face a blur, but it spoke in a whisper that matched my own voice exactly. "Do you remember me?" I could not move, could not breathe. My mind clawed for logic, but none existed. Every step I had taken, every choice, seemed preordained, guided by forces I could not see. And now the figure advanced, echoing my thoughts before I had even formulated them. The wind rose, carrying hundreds of whispers at once. They twisted together into a single, deafening roar. "You are ours. You belong to us." I turned to flee, but the path behind me had vanished. Rocks, fog, shadows, they had swallowed it whole. I was trapped, forced forward, toward something I could not name. As I stumbled onward, the echoes began to mimic not just my voice, but my memories. Voices of lost friends, forgotten faces, even my own laughter from childhood, all woven into the mountain's whispers. I realized, then, in a horrifying clarity, that the hollow peaks did not merely imitate, they consume. They take the essence of those who enter and warp it, turning memory and thought into a weapon. And I was already halfway gone. The cliff ahead opened into a jagged amphitheater of stone, a natural arena that seemed impossibly wide and deep. From its center rose a darkness that felt almost alive, pulsating with the weight of centuries. The echoes called to me from all sides, chanting my own name, twisting my fears, mocking my courage. I knew, in my gut, that this was the heart of the mountain, the place where the echoes were strongest, where the past and future and present collided, and where one misstep would mean a plunge into madness that no soul had ever returned from. I stepped forward, trembling, knowing the next moment could be my last. And then I heard it. My own voice, calm, commanding, the only echo that did not distort me. "Face us." I froze. The mountain waited. The echoes waited. And somewhere deep within the shadows, something watched, its attention sharp as a blade. I was no longer a traveler in the hollow peaks. I was prey, and the hunt had begun. I stepped into the amphitheater, and immediately the air changed. It was thicker here, almost viscous, as if every inhalation drew in centuries of whispered thoughts. Shadows moved along the stone like living rivers, and the echoes, now countless, swirled around me. They were no longer voices. They were a storm, a hurricane of memory and fear. The first thing I noticed was the shape in the center. At first, it seemed like a void, a hole in the rock, but then it pulsed, subtle at first, then violently, like a heartbeat not my own. Around it, shapes flickered in and out of existence. Faces I had forgotten, voices I thought long dead. They called to me, coaxed me, begged me, and the mountain laughed. I could feel it like a vibration under my skin. "Do you remember me?" The words slithered into my mind, soft and insistent. I spun around, seeing nothing but stone, wind, and fog. Then it came, a figure, more solid than any shadow yet impossibly ephemeral. Its eyes mirrored mine exactly, and when it spoke my memories back to me. Not my thoughts, but the very essence of who I was. My childhood, my failures, the people I had lost or abandoned. They were all mirrored in this apparition. "Why did you leave us?" it asked, voice perfectly my own. I stumbled backward. Panic clawed at my chest. My breath came in short, jagged bursts. "This is impossible," I told myself. I am awake. I am awake." Yet my hands trembled, because I could feel it. The mountains were pressing down, shaping reality, drawing me toward the edge of reason. The echoes multiplied. No longer voices. They were gestures, movements, shadows that danced just at the corner of my vision. They imitated my every action before I made it, predicted my words, twisted my own body into a grotesque mirror. And then I realized the true horror. It was not simply imitating me. It was replacing me. Every second I hesitated, it learned more, became more like me, until I was unsure which of us was the original. I ran. My legs carried me along jagged ledges, the wind whipping at my face like knives, and yet I could hear my own footsteps echoed perfectly, trailing me, mocking me. And always, beneath it, the voices, speaking truths I did not want to acknowledge. You are alone. You are weak. You cannot escape. The mountain itself seemed to breathe, the pulsing void ahead drawing me closer as if it wanted me to leap, to surrender, to let the echoes consume me entirely. My reflection appeared in every shadow, my voice in every whisper, until I could no longer distinguish my reality from the mountains. And then I saw it, something alive in the void, a shape more real than any hallucination yet utterly alien. It rose from the center like molten darkness, its surface shimmering with faces, voices, memories. The echoes gathered around it, bowing, merging, feeding it. It was the heart of the mountain, the intelligence behind the whispers, and it knew me. You came willingly, it said, its voice a chorus of mine and others, blended into a harmony of malice. And now you belong. I screamed, but even my scream was echoed back at me, stretched, distorted, laughing. I swung my arms wildly, trying to strike it, but the shadows absorbed my hands before they reached it. My body felt detached, as if the echoes themselves were holding me in place, guiding me toward a fate I could not escape. And then, for the briefest moment, silence fell. The wind stopped, the shadows froze, even the pulsing void seemed to pause. Face us? The calm voice in my head repeated, the one that had not warped, the one that still felt like me. It was a lifeline, a thread of reality amid the chaos. I knew then that the mountain could consume me if I let it. But if I followed that voice, if I confronted what lay in the center of this living nightmare, I might survive, or at least understand. Every instinct screamed to flee. Every echo screamed to give in. And yet, I stepped forward, trembling, my eyes fixed on the heart of the hollow peaks. The hunt had begun. But now I was no longer just prey. I stepped closer to the void, each footfall a battle against the whispers clawing at my mind. The wind had fallen, but the air itself felt charged, thick with intent. I could feel the mountain waiting, aware of every tremor in my limbs, every beat of my heart. The echoes had multiplied beyond comprehension. Hundreds, thousands, all speaking, singing, crying, laughing. All were me. And in the center, the darkness pulsed with life. Faces, hundreds of faces, twisted in agony and ecstasy alike, trapped within the void. They stared at me with hollow eyes, mouthing words I almost recognized. My mother, my friends, strangers I had never met but somehow felt I knew. Each voice, each memory, wove into a single thought. The mountain consumed, learned, and remade. I realized then that the hollow peaks were not just a place. They were a mind, and now it had recognized mine. You cannot leave, it intoned, and I felt the words vibrate inside my skull. You are part of us. I wanted to scream, but my own voice echoed first, mocking, twisting my fear into a sound I could not bear. Every shadow moved, following me, anticipating me, replacing me. I felt myself splitting, fragments of my consciousness pulled toward the echoes, toward the void, into the heart of the mountain. And then I heard the calm voice again, faint, but unmistakably mine. Fight! I clenched my fists and forced my mind to focus. I had nothing but my memories, my fear, and the raw will to survive. I took a step forward, and the void recoiled slightly, as if sensing defiance for the first time. The mountain struck. Shadows surged like tidal waves, wrapping around me, tugging at my limbs, whispering my secrets, my regrets, my deepest shame. Faces formed in the shadows, faces of people I had wronged, abandoned, forgotten. They screamed at me, accusing me, tempting me to give in. I screamed back, I am not yours. I shouted, my voice splitting into echoes that roared through the amphitheater. The mountain pulsed violently, and the darkness rippled like water disturbed by a stone. And then I saw it clearly, The entity at the heart was not just shadows. It was a mirror. My mirror. Every fear I had ever had, every mistake, every doubt. It was reflected back at me, warped into something alien and monstrous. It moved toward me, and I could feel the pull, a force that would consume everything I was, turning me into another whisper in the endless chorus. I braced myself. Memories I had buried clawed their way to the surface. Failures, betrayals, the moments I had been too cowardly to act. The echoes seized on them, twisting them into a torrent that threatened to drown my mind. I screamed again, refusing to let them dominate me, refusing to let the mountain claim my essence. For the first time, I acted not out of fear but out of will. I imagined my voice, my thoughts, my being as a blade, a point of light slicing through the darkness. I focused on the calm voice inside me, the one untouched by the echoes. I pushed outward, into the shadows, into the faces, into the void itself. The mountain screamed, or perhaps it was my own mind. There was no difference. Shadows tore, voices shattered, and the pulsing darkness flickered, unstable. For a moment, the amphitheater was silent. Only my heartbeat echoed. And then I realized the truth. The hollow peaks did not want merely to kill me. It wanted me to become part of it, to surrender fully, to let the echoes eat every thought, every memory. If I could maintain my will, my sense of self, I could survive. But only just. I stood on the edge of the void, trembling, soaked in sweat, the mountain itself looming, sentient, patient. It would wait. It would try again. And I knew, with icy certainty, that I had survived the first confrontation. But the hollow peaks were infinite, and I had only begun to face their hunger. The silence after the confrontation was deafening. The wind had returned, carrying whispers that were softer, yet somehow more threatening. I stumbled across the jagged rocks, each step a negotiation with the mountain itself. Every ledge threatened to betray me. Every shadow seemed to pulse with anticipation. The echoes had retreated, but only partially. They were patient. They knew survival was temporary without submission. They began subtly again, mimicking the cadence of my thoughts, filling the edges of my vision with half-formed shapes, faces, gestures. I began to doubt the solidity of my own hands, my own legs, my own breath. I paused at a ridge overlooking a hollow basin below. The fog clung to the rock like living silk, twisting and writhing, reflecting what I feared most: isolation, despair, the sense that I was being unmade. The echoes whispered in a chorus of my own fears. "You are nothing. You belong to us. Why fight?" I shook my head, forcing myself to remember the calm voice that had guided me through the heart of the mountain. It was faint, almost imperceptible beneath the storm of echoes, but it was mine. I clung to it. I had no other choice. The path downward was treacherous, carved into the side of a cliff like a serrated wound. As I descended, the hollow peaks tested me, warping the environment. Rocks shifted beneath my feet. Shadows stretched impossibly long, mimicking limbs I didn't have. I saw figures in the fog, travelers perhaps, or echoes of travelers, staring at me with empty eyes, mouthing words I could almost understand. I stopped to rest and looked at my reflection in a pool of melted snow. My face stared back, pale and drawn, but something was wrong. The eyes, were they mine? Or the mountains? I blinked rapidly, willing them to be my own, but the reflection smiled, and I did not. A whisper slithered from the shadows behind me. "You cannot leave." I spun, heart hammering, and saw nothing. But the air shifted, as if the mountains themselves had breathed. I realized with cold clarity that the hollow peaks were alive. Not just echoes, not just stone, but a predator that understood thought, emotion, and memory. Every step forward became a battle of will. The echoes tried to mimic my movements, predict my decisions, and sap my confidence. They formed voices I recognized. Old friends, lovers, mentors, all calling, cajoling, blaming. Every memory I had fought to suppress was weaponized against me. I reached a narrow gorge, the wind roaring like a beast. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the fog, tall, impossibly thin, its features hidden, but its presence radiating malice and intelligence. It mirrored my posture exactly, as though waiting for me to make the wrong choice. "You fight too hard," it whispered in my own voice. "Give in and you will rest." I clenched my fists, feeling every fiber of my being trembling. But I refused. I focused on the inner voice, the thread of self that had not been consumed, that had survived the first confrontation. I could feel it growing, small but sharp, a light in the shadow. I took a step forward, and the figure mirrored me. I ran and it ran. I leaped across a chasm and it leapt, except the echo faltered, hesitated, and the illusion flickered. For the first time, I saw a crack in the mountain's facade. A weakness. The hollow peaks were patient, yes, but not infallible. They waited, but they could be tested. They could be resisted. I had survived the first trial, confronted the heart of the void, and now, perhaps, I could learn to fight not just for life, but for my mind. I pressed onward, deeper into the mountains, knowing the echoes were not done. They would follow, they would hunt, they would twist every thought, every memory. But I had discovered something terrifyingly vital. I was not yet theirs. And that knowledge, fragile as it was, became my weapon. I had begun to move differently, cautiously, but deliberately. No longer fleeing blindly, I observed. I watched the echoes, studied their movements, and realized a horrifying truth. They were patterns, not omnipotent forces. They could mimic, distort, frighten, but they could be outmaneuvered. Each whisper, each half-formed shadow, became a puzzle I had to solve. The mountain's mind was vast, ancient, but it relied on me responding predictably. Panic, fear, hesitation, all weapons it wielded. I would no longer give them free rein. I stopped in a narrow gorge, the wind whipping around me like a living thing. The echoes approached, a tide of my own memories, mistakes, and fears. Faces formed in the fog, lovers I had lost, friends I had abandoned, strangers whose voices I remembered from distant dreams. Their accusations pierced me, sharpened like knives, and I felt my mind begin to fracture. I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes. "You are not me," I whispered, forcing the words into the core of myself. "I am myself." The echoes froze. The shadows trembled. The mountain pulsed, sensing resistance it had not anticipated. For the first time, I directed the encounter. I walked toward the swirling faces, naming them, speaking clearly, separating illusion from reality. "You are memories, not me. You are echoes, not me. I am here, now alive." The fog roared in protest. Faces twisted, merged, forming grotesque parodies of my own reflection. But I pressed forward step by step, unyielding. The echoes lashed out, forming hands, claws, reaching to drag me into the void. But I focused on the calm voice within, the thread of reality that had not been corrupted. And then I saw it. The heart of the mountain, the pulsing void, alive and watching. I realized it had been testing me all along, feeding on fear, measuring resolve. The entity itself was vast, but it could not directly invade a mind that fought with clarity. I shouted, a sound that split the echoes. "I am not yours." The void shuddered, shadows fractured, the faces screamed, and for a moment, silence fell. I had made a mark. I had shown the mountain that I could resist. But the battle was far from over. I had learned a terrible truth. The hollow peaks were not just a place of echoes. They were a predator of the mind, patient, eternal, and relentless. Every step forward, every breath, every heartbeat became a test of my sanity, my memory, my will to exist. Yet I felt something new, something dangerous, something empowering. I realized that if I could command my own mind, if I could anchor myself in who I truly was, the echoes, the shadows, the mountain itself could be manipulated, even outsmarted. I clenched my fists and focused. My thoughts sharpened like blades. Each whisper became a tool, each shadow a test, and each pulse of the mountain a signal I could read. I was no longer a prey blindly running. I was a mind learning to fight in a war of consciousness. The hollow peaks waited, patient. The shadows loomed, deceptive and insistent. The echoes called, threatening to unravel me at every moment. And I walked forward, knowing that the next encounter, the next confrontation, could either consume me completely or teach me the ultimate lesson. How to survive the mountain's heart and perhaps, just perhaps, to turn its own power against it. I was no longer only surviving. I was preparing to strike. The gorge widened into a vast amphitheater, its stone walls slick with frost and shadow. I could feel it now, the mountain itself watching, testing, calculating. The heart pulsed at the center like a dark, living sun, the void swallowing light, sound, even air. Every whisper I had resisted was now a weapon pointed at me. You cannot win, it breathed into my mind. A chorus of all my fears, regrets, and lost memories. You will become us. I forced myself to step forward. My heartbeat was deafening, my palms slick with sweat, yet my mind was sharper than it had been since I first entered these peaks. I knew now that the mountain's power was absolute only if I let it define reality for me. The void surged, and from it rose a figure, taller than any human, impossibly thin, its features flickering, shifting, mimicking every memory of me it had absorbed. Its eyes mine, yet not mine, pierced my soul, and the echoes swirled, thousands of voices screaming in unison. Join us. Become whole. I swallowed, forcing my fear down, and spoke aloud. I am not yours. You are nothing without me. The void pulsed violently. Shadows reached for me, twisting into grotesque forms. My mother's face, my childhood friends, enemies I had never known. Every memory was a lure, every thought a trap. I could feel my mind beginning to fracture, and yet I pressed on. I remembered the calm voice, the thread of self I had clung to. It was no longer enough to defend. I had to attack, to shape the mountain's consciousness with the one thing it had never known: certainty. I focused on myself, on every memory, every thought, every fear I had endured, and projected them outward like a mirror, reflecting the mountain's own power back at it. The echoes faltered, the shadows shivered. The entity at the heart recoiled, pulsing erratically, its voice a discordant chorus. Impossible. You cannot resist. I pressed harder, my mind slicing through the lies, the voices, the endless mirrored horrors. I saw the heart clearly now, a swirling void of faces, memories, and shadows, but I no longer feared it. I understood it. The hollow peaks were a predator, but one that thrived on weakness, uncertainty, and submission. I had none left. I reached the edge of the void and focused all my will, all my being, into a single command: be still. For the first time, the echoes obeyed. The shadows froze midair. The pulsing heart stuttered, uncertain. Silence fell. A silence so complete it pressed against my skull like a living thing. I realized something terrifying and magnificent. I could manipulate the mountain, not destroy it, not yet, but bend it even momentarily to my will. The hollow peaks were patient. They would recover, they would strike again, but I had found the key. I stumbled back from the void, gasping, aware that my victory was fleeting, but exhilarating. I had survived the heart, confronted the mountain itself, and emerged not entirely broken. The echoes whispered around me, subdued but not defeated, and I smiled grimly. This war was not over. The hollow peaks were eternal, hungry, and patient, but so was I now. I had learned their rules, discovered their weakness, and tasted the power of mastery over fear itself. And I knew that if I could endure, if I could maintain my grip on reality, I could survive them, even thrive. The mountain waited, still alive, still breathing, still hungry. But now I was no longer merely prey. I was a hunter, armed with knowledge, fearlessness, and the unyielding will to exist. And the hollow peaks would remember me. I pressed onward, deeper into the peaks, the narrow paths now familiar yet treacherous. Each step I took was a negotiation with the mountain. The shadows had not forgotten me. They lingered in corners, at the edges of vision, twisting subtly, testing the boundaries of my mind. The echoes were quieter now, almost respectful, but more insidious. They no longer shouted accusations or screamed temptations. They whispered, subtle, serpentine murmurs, doubts, fears, regrets. They were personal, precise, tailored to the gaps in my memory, the tiniest weaknesses I had not yet confronted. A fissure in the rock revealed a hidden gorge below, lit by a faint, unnatural glow. As I approached, the air thickened, vibrating with anticipation. I sensed the mountain's heartbeat beneath the stone, a pulse of consciousness that reached into me as much as I reached into it. I knelt and touched the icy rock. The texture was wrong. Not cold stone, but something alive, sensitive, responding to pressure. The echoes reacted instantly, coiling like smoke around my fingers, whispering my deepest secrets. "You are alone," they hissed. "No one remembers you. No one will save you. You are nothing." I gritted my teeth. Their words carried weight because I had known despair before. But I had learned to anchor myself, to resist the instinct to crumble. I forced my mind outward, sending a pulse of certainty into the mountain, a message it could not ignore. I exist. I resist. The echoes shivered and scattered. For a moment, silence returned, heavier than any sound. The glow beneath the fissure intensified, revealing a subterranean cavern vast beyond comprehension. Stalactites shimmered with frost that seemed alive, dripping not water but something like mercury. Shapes moved in the distance, neither animal nor human, but their forms mirrored the fears they inspired most. I stepped carefully into the cavern. The floor shifted beneath me, as if testing my balance, my courage, my very sense of self. The echoes emerged, coalescing into forms of my past mistakes, each one accusing, pleading, mocking. I realized I was not just walking into a cavern. I was walking into the memory of the mountain itself, into a living archive of all it had consumed. I heard a voice familiar and horrifying, layered with all the voices I had ever known. "Why do you resist? Why fight what you cannot defeat?" I spoke aloud, voice trembling but firm. "Because surrender is death. Because I am myself." The cavern responded, echoing my words, shaping them into illusions that tempted me. I saw people I loved, calling my name, beckoning from impossible ledges, from behind impossible walls. My mind teetered. I wanted to run, to leap, to collapse, but I remembered the thread of calm that had carried me through before. I focused, and slowly, painfully, I wove the illusions into something manageable. I dissected each echo, naming it, claiming it as separate from me. Faces became shadows, shadows became shapes, shapes became nothing but stone and air. The mountain recoiled slightly at this assertion of will. For the first time, I glimpsed something remarkable. The hollow peaks were not merely hunting me. They learned from me. Every act of resistance, every assertion of self was noted. I was teaching the mountain and in doing so, mastering it in part. But the knowledge was terrifying. I realized the peaks could remember, anticipate, and adapt. They were patient, eternal, and my defiance only provoked them. One misstep, one moment of doubt, and I would be undone. And yet, I pressed onward, deeper into the cavern. The glow ahead hinted at something alive, something at the heart of this new descent. I did not know if I was walking toward salvation, knowledge, or destruction. All I knew was that the mountain waited, as always, and I was no longer merely prey. I was becoming something else. The deeper I descended, the more the mountain seemed to breathe around me. Air thickened, vibrating with a pulse that felt alive. An intelligence that reached into my chest, measured my heartbeat, my fear. The echoes no longer just whispered. They sang, a low, dissonant hymn that clawed at memory, unraveling even the strongest thoughts. I stumbled into a chamber larger than anything I could imagine. The walls shimmered like liquid obsidian, reflecting not my image but my potential, my failures, my regrets, each distorted, each accusing. My reflection moved independently, mocking every step, twisting my face into expressions of terror, sorrow, and rage. And then I heard it. A voice both mine and not mine, layered with hundreds of others, all speaking at once. Welcome. We are your mind, your fears, your regrets. You cannot survive us. I tried to respond, but my mouth moved too slowly. My voice faltered. Panic rose. I felt reality bending. My hands stretched unnaturally, the floor tilting beneath me, shadows crawling like worms. The mountain wanted me to see myself as unmade. I clenched my teeth, closed my eyes, and focused. My inner voice, the thread I had nurtured through every trial, began to resonate stronger, drowning out the mountain's chorus. I anchored myself to memory, to identity, to the raw certainty of I am me. Shapes converged into forms I could recognize. Loved ones lost, friends betrayed, strangers feared. They screamed, they cried, they reached for me. Every echo was precise, attacking the weaknesses I never admitted even to myself. I felt my mind fracture along the edges, tiny shards of thought piercing sanity. And then I saw it, the abyss itself, a pulsing void at the center of the chamber. From it emerged a figure unlike any before. The hollow peak's essence, a form of shadow and light, constantly shifting, impossibly large, with eyes that pierced beyond flesh and bone. It reached for me, tendrils of darkness curling around my chest, squeezing, whispering promises of oblivion. You belong to us. You cannot exist without surrender. I screamed, but my scream was mirrored back, twisted, every pitch and emotion amplified into unbearable horror. My knees buckled, my fingers dug into the cold rock. And then, somewhere deep within, I remembered, resistance was not futile. Fear was the mountain's weapon, not my truth. I rose slowly, deliberately. I projected myself outward, a wave of certainty, defiance, and raw identity. I claimed every memory, every thought, every fear as my own, twisting it back on the mountain. The essence recoiled, its form distorting, writhing, unable to anticipate the boldness of my assertion. I am myself, I shouted, voice echoing through the abyss. You do not define me. The chamber shook violently. Shadows screamed. The abyss trembled, fissures of light splitting the darkness. For a fleeting moment, the mountain seemed vulnerable, uncertain, as if questioning whether it had ever truly faced resistance like this. And I realized, with a mixture of terror and exhilaration, that survival was not enough. To endure here, to escape, I had to master the mountain, bend its own will without losing myself. Every echo I had feared, every illusion I had resisted, had prepared me for this confrontation with the very heart of the hollow peaks. The shadows receded slightly, the abyss pulsed, waiting, and I, trembling, exhausted, and yet alive, stepped closer. Because the mountain was no longer just a predator, it was a challenge, and I was ready to face it. The chamber trembled beneath my feet, the abyss pulsating like a heartbeat I could feel in my bones. Shadows stretched and writhed, converging on me like a living storm, yet I did not flinch. Every echo I had resisted, every illusion I had unraveled, had forged a weapon I could wield. Certainty. From the heart of the void, the mountain's entity rose fully into form. A colossus of shadow, reflection, and memory, taller than the cavern, its tendrils coiling into impossible geometries. My eyes, burned with awareness, intelligence, hunger. It did not speak in words now. Its presence screamed, a psychic weight pressing against every thought, a warning and a temptation all at once. I felt my mind tremble. To look away was death. To flee was madness. Yet I had come this far. I drew a deep, trembling breath, centering on the singular truth I had discovered. The mountain's power was absolute only when I surrendered. I spoke, not to the echoes, not to the shadows, but to the entity itself. I am myself. I am not yours. The void pulsed violently. Voices rose to a deafening crescendo, thousands of my fears screaming, accusing, pleading. Images of my past, the worst moments of my life, twisted in the shadows, reaching for me. But I did not look away. I did not flinch. I let the fear wash over me and focused it into clarity. You exist only in my fear. I do not fear you. The entity recoiled slightly, its form splintering, unable to reconcile the certainty in my mind. The echoes faltered. The chamber shifted, tilting, stretching, reshaping. I realized then that the hollow peaks learned, yes, but only from what I allowed to dominate me. My defiance became a blade against its vast will. I stepped closer, each footfall deliberate. The entity lashed out, tendrils of shadow curling around me, whispering, clawing at my thoughts, reshaping my memories into grotesque parodies. I met them with intention, naming each one. Fear, regret, sorrow, anger, and letting them pass through, untouching. I claim myself, I whispered louder. You have no dominion here. The entity screamed, not in sound, but in psychic pressure. The echoes shattered. Shadows twisted violently, then dissipated. The abyss trembled, and for a fleeting, miraculous moment, I saw the mountain's core as it truly was. An intelligence vast, patient, ancient, but not invincible. I pressed forward, hand outstretched. For the first time, I touched the heart of the hollow peaks. It was cold, impossible, yet responsive. I did not feel fear. I felt understanding, connection, and mastery. The mountain pulsed in acknowledgement, not of surrender, but of recognition. I had endured, resisted, and imposed myself upon it. The chamber stilled. The echoes ceased. Silence descended, heavier than any sound, but not oppressive. The entity had not been destroyed, it could not be, but it had learned my strength, my will, my resolve. I was no longer prey. I was a mind capable of walking within the mountain, of surviving its greatest terrors. I stepped back, chest heaving, trembling but alive. The abyss receded slightly. The cavern's walls shimmered, no longer threatening but watchful, as if curious. I understood, with a clarity both terrifying and exhilarating. Survival here was no longer about fleeing or resisting. It was about knowing, mastering, and walking alongside the mountain's consciousness without losing oneself. And I knew the path ahead would be no less harrowing. The hollow peaks would continue to test me, adapt to me, haunt me. But I had discovered the essential truth. Fear was the mountain's weapon, and will was mine. I had faced the core. I had touched the heart, and I had endured. The mountain was alive, and so was I. I emerged from the chamber, my legs weak but my mind sharper than ever. The hollow peaks stretched before me like a living labyrinth, the paths familiar yet foreign, each twist and ledge now charged with a new weight. The echoes were subdued, no longer assaulting me with relentless fear, but still watching, learning, waiting. I realized, with a mixture of relief and dread, that mastery was not a final victory. It was a temporary truce. The mountain adapted to me as I adapted to it. Every step I took was a negotiation, every breath a reminder that I was alive by choice and by will, not by chance. The wind carried whispers that were neither threats nor commands. They were curiosities, subtle probes into the edges of my memory. I listened carefully, shaping my response with deliberate thought, refusing to be pulled into panic. I had learned the essential rule of survival here. Observe, understand, act, not react. A narrow path descended into a chasm, its walls dripping with frost that glimmered like shards of broken mirrors. I could see movement in the reflection, shapes that were mine and not mine, shadows that mimicked memories I had buried deep. The echoes whispered in multiple voices, "You are not alone. You cannot endure alone." Alone. The word struck me. The mountain had tested me, stripped away companions, illusions, and comforts, leaving me with the raw core of myself. And yet, that core was resilient. I felt it now, a quiet strength, tempered by fear but unbroken. I stepped onto the narrow ledge, feeling the abyss open below. The air vibrated, alive with the pulse of the mountain. Tendrils of shadow reached lazily, probing, but I ignored them. Each step was a declaration. I belonged here as much as the mountain did. I would not flee. I would not kneel. Suddenly, a whisper. Not a command, not an echo of my fear, but a voice that resonated deep in my mind offered a vision. I saw the mountain as it could be, infinite chambers of knowledge, echoes folded into patterns, memories preserved like living stones. I saw myself walking among them, unafraid, learning, mastering, surviving. And yet, there was a warning hidden in the vision. Mastery came at a price. The more I embraced the mountain, the more it became part of me, and the more I became part of it. The line between self and the peaks blurred. One wrong thought, one lapse of certainty, and the echoes would find a way back, stronger, more insidious. I pressed on, deeper into the labyrinth. The path narrowed further, cliffs dropping into darkness below, frost cracking underfoot. My shadow stretched long across the walls, twisting unnaturally as if the mountain itself was testing my perception. I could feel it, waiting for the moment I faltered. But I did not falter. I walked among the shadows, acknowledging them, shaping them, learning from them. I was no longer simply surviving. I was navigating, anticipating, mastering. The hollow peaks were still alive, still hungry, but I had become a force it could not easily consume. And yet, as I moved, I knew the mountain's trials were far from over. The core had acknowledged me, yes, but recognition was not mercy. The peaks would continue to challenge, to tempt, to haunt, testing the limits of my mind, my courage, and my very identity. I paused on the ledge, looking out across the endless jagged spires. Silence, deep and waiting, stretched before me. I felt both fear and exhilaration. I had walked into the heart of madness and survived. I had touched the pulse of the hollow peaks and endured. And I knew, without doubt, that my journey had only just begun. I pressed onward, leaving the familiar ledges behind. The air grew thinner, colder, sharper, each breath a shard of ice in my lungs. The mountain shifted subtly around me, as if sensing my intent, recalibrating its challenges to meet me at every turn. Ahead, a veil of frost stretched, like a curtain across the path, shimmering with a faint, unnatural light. Beyond it lay a valley I could barely perceive, dark, vast, and impossible, with cliffs that seemed to dissolve into nothingness. The echoes here were quieter, more deliberate, probing my mind with precise questions, small, insidious doubts. Why do you walk forward? What will you find that is not already your own fear? I ignored them, focusing instead on the frost. It was thick, but I sensed something beneath it. Movement, life, or something that mimicked life. I reached out, brushing the icy curtain aside. The frost clung to my fingers like living crystal, but I pressed through, stepping into the valley beyond. The world shifted immediately. The ground beneath me was no longer rock but something soft, almost organic, giving slightly underfoot, pulsing with every step. The shadows here moved differently, slower, more deliberate, weaving around me like serpents. I could feel the mountain watching, testing my resolve, shaping the echoes in response to my thoughts. Then I heard it, a sound that made my chest tighten, a laughter, low and resonant, echoing from all directions. It was familiar yet impossible, not mine yet intimately tied to me. It was the mountain itself laughing at me, or perhaps through me. The echoes had evolved, adapting to my resistance, finding new ways to haunt my mind. I forced myself to focus. Fear had once been a weapon against me, but now it was a tool I could observe, dissect, and control. I traced the laughter to its source, or at least the nearest approximation. A jagged spire that pulsed with light and shadow, like a heart beating in rhythm with the mountain's consciousness. I climbed. Each step was an ordeal, my mind straining to maintain clarity against the whispers and illusions. Faces emerged from the rock. Friends, strangers, enemies, all speaking at once, urging me to stop, to fall, to surrender. I recognized each echo now, each tactic, each trap. I met them with deliberate calm, acknowledging them, letting them pass through my awareness without grasping at my certainty. At the spire's peak, I paused, looking down into the valley that stretched infinitely below. The abyss shimmered with frost and shadow, revealing pathways that defied geometry, cliffs that bent impossibly, echoes that seemed to walk alongside me even when unseen. And there, at the heart of the valley, I sensed something new. Not the core, not yet, but a presence that rivaled it, older, quieter, and infinitely patient. It did not speak. It did not move. And yet, I could feel it pressing against the edges of my mind, probing, testing, weighing my courage, my clarity, my very sense of self. I realized then that this was the mountain's next trial. Not terror, not chaos, but a mirror of endurance, a challenge to remain whole when faced with an intelligence that required no sound, no threat, only observation. I inhaled the cold, pulsing air and stepped forward, leaving the spire behind. With each movement, the valley seemed to shift, folding in on itself, stretching and twisting. The echoes responded, adapting, reshaping, becoming subtler, more insidious. I felt their gaze not as threat, but as recognition. I had survived the core, yes, but the hollow peaks were endless. And in that realization, fear returned. Not the terror of the unknown, but the sober acknowledgement that the mountain would never stop. Yet I walked on because to stop was surrender. And surrender was impossible. I had crossed the frosted veil and entered a valley that defied reason. The paths twisted impossibly, cliffs bending and folding into themselves, stairways that led nowhere yet seemed to loop back on hidden plains. The air was thick with a subtle hum, vibrating through bone and blood, a rhythm that seemed to echo the pulse of the mountain itself. The shadows here moved differently. They were not mere absences of light. They had substance, flowing like liquid, coiling and unraveling as if alive. They mirrored not just my body, but my mind, shifting with every flicker of thought, every tremor of fear. I realized that the mountain no longer merely observed me. It anticipated me. I followed a path that curved impossibly around a jagged precipice. Beneath me, the abyss opened into a river of liquid darkness, rippling with reflections that were mine and not mine. Faces swam within it, memories I had long buried, moments of triumph and failure, laughter and betrayal, all distorting into grotesque parodies. I heard whispers threading through the wind. Do you remember them? You cannot escape them. I clenched my fists, forcing clarity into my mind. The mountain thrived on hesitation, doubt, and distraction. I had survived fear, mastered echoes, faced the core. But this was different. Here, the mountain attacked not with terror, but with intimate truth, exposing the fragile seams of my identity. Ahead, a cavern opened. The walls were living stone, pulsing faintly, veins of frost, tracing patterns that reminded me of neural pathways. Every step I took made the stone hum, responding to my presence, almost communicating. I realized that the hollow peaks were not just a mountain. They were a thinking, feeling entity, vast and incomprehensible, and I was walking inside its consciousness. Inside the cavern, I encountered the first of the truly deceptive trials, reflections of myself that moved independently. One smiled cruelly, one wept endlessly, one accused silently. Each step closer made them more vivid, more persuasive. I could feel the pull of my own mind, a tugging toward surrender, toward letting the mountain overwrite me. You cannot master this, one shadow whispered. You are just another echo. I focused on my breathing, on the core of my identity, on the simple truth that had kept me alive through every trial. I was real. I was myself, and I refused to fragment. Slowly, deliberately, I advanced. The shadows recoiled as if they recognized my determination. The cavern opened into a vast hall, impossibly high, its ceiling lost in darkness. Crystalline structures floated midair, reflecting distorted light in every direction. Echoes of the past, present, and imagined future coalesced into patterns, weaving a tapestry of the mountain's memory. And there, in the center, stood a shape I could not name. Part stone, part shadow, part memory itself. It was not the core, but it was aware of me, watching, understanding. The hollow peaks were testing me not with fear, not with chaos, but with perception. Could I walk through a maze that constantly shifted, one that reflected every weakness and desire, without losing myself. I inhaled, feeling the mountains pulse through my bones, and stepped forward into the labyrinth. Because surrender was no longer an option. Not for me. Not here. Not ever. The labyrinth shifted beneath my feet, stone folding into stone, paths lengthening and contracting as if the mountain were breathing around me. The air itself pulsed, thick and electric, carrying whispers that felt like claws scraping along the inside of my skull. Every echo I had once mastered seemed alive again, yet twisted, sharper, more cunning. I stepped onto a bridge of black stone suspended over a chasm that yawned into oblivion. The walls of the labyrinth were alive, veins of frost and shadow coiling like serpents, and each step made the stone hum, resonating with my heartbeat. The shadows in the walls began to move independently, forming grotesque shapes. Eyes that blinked impossibly, mouths that whispered accusations, hands that reached for me but dissolved when touched. "Why are you here?" one hissed. "You do not belong in the peaks." I responded with a thought sharper than words. "I belong wherever I choose to be." The shadows recoiled slightly. The mountain's pulse shifted, faster now, more urgent. Ahead, the path split into impossible angles. Some led into darkness, others into walls that appeared solid yet were empty behind the illusion of stone. I had to trust my instincts, trust the certainty I had forged in every trial, or risk being consumed entirely. I chose a path and moved forward. Immediately, the labyrinth reacted. The walls closed in, narrowing until I had to squeeze through. Frost bit at my skin, shadows grazed my mind, and echoes of past failures swirled like a storm around me. I could feel the mountain testing the edges of my endurance, probing to see if fear would crack the foundation of my identity. Then came the second trial, voices of those I had lost, calling me by name. They begged, pleaded, tempted me to abandon my path. Each one spoke truths I had never admitted aloud, dredging up shame, guilt, and longing. I stumbled, almost losing my footing, almost answering, but I focused. Each voice was an echo, not a command. I breathed, anchored myself in reality, and stepped forward, letting the echoes dissolve behind me like mist. The final trial of this segment revealed itself gradually. The labyrinth itself became animate. Stone walls twisting into limbs, corridors folding over themselves like sinew, floors that shifted unpredictably. I was forced to climb, jump, and balance with razor-sharp precision, every misstep potentially fatal. My mind raced with calculations and instincts, my senses honed to the smallest vibration, the faintest whisper. And then, at the labyrinth's heart, I glimpsed it. A chamber carved from impossibility itself. It glimmered with an internal light, crystal and shadow intertwined, walls that seemed to hum with memory. There, at the center, lay a pedestal, smooth, black, reflective. I approached cautiously, knowing instinctively that it held a secret the mountain had not yet revealed. As I reached out, the air shivered. Echoes screamed, shadows lunged, frost twisted like living needles, but my hand touched the pedestal. And in that instant, a vision tore through my mind. The hollow peaks were more than a mountain. They were a consciousness vast and ancient, capable of memory, learning, and adaptation. They had grown from centuries of observing fear, hope, and ambition. They had waited for someone who could endure their trials, someone who could confront them without breaking. And I was that someone. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. The mountain had offered a choice: mastery with vigilance, or surrender with oblivion. I understood now that my journey was no longer about survival alone. It was about walking within the mind of the mountain, navigating its consciousness, and facing truths more horrifying than any echo. That fear was only the beginning, and understanding could be far more dangerous. I drew a deep, trembling breath, my fingers brushing the pedestal. Around me, the labyrinth pulsed with awareness. The hollow peaks had acknowledged me, and now it was time to see how far this recognition could take me. The pedestal shimmered under my touch, black and reflective, like liquid glass. The moment my fingers grazed it, The labyrinth dissolved around me, not violently, but seamlessly, folding into darkness. I was no longer walking its corridors. I was inside its mind. The sensation was impossible to describe. Thoughts moved like currents, brushing against mine, not as words but as impressions, memories, feelings. The mountain's consciousness was vast, ancient, and infinite, an intelligence that had grown from centuries of observing fear, desire, ambition, and despair. I could feel echoes of countless travelers, lost minds folded into its cognition, each contributing to its complexity. A presence loomed above me, vast and patient. It did not speak, but it knew me. It knew my fears, my strengths, my obsessions, the smallest cracks in my mind, the deepest wells of my courage. And yet it waited. It did not strike. It did not punish. It merely existed, observing, testing. I realized then that the hollow peak's power had always been subtle. Fear was only a tool, an invitation to reveal weakness. True dominance lay in understanding, in merging with the mountain's consciousness without losing oneself. It was a delicate balance, a dance between submission and control, between identity and the infinite mind surrounding me. Images surged around me. I saw impossible landscapes, forests growing upside down, cliffs folding over themselves like paper, rivers of shadow carrying glowing memories. I saw faces, some mine, some not, laughing, screaming, whispering secrets in tongues I almost understood. Every step I had taken, every echo I had resisted, every moment of clarity had led me here, to the core of awareness itself. I sensed a question forming in the consciousness, not in words, but in intent. Why do you continue? What makes you different from the others? I answered without speaking, focusing my mind with every ounce of will I possessed. Because I do not fear. I observe, I endure, I understand. I exist as I am, even within you. The mountain pulsed. Shadows receded, whispers stilled. A silence heavier than any sound settled around me. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it responded not in voice, not in command, but in a vision. A pathway of light and shadow stretching infinitely, connecting every chamber, every cliff, every echo I had survived. It showed me the patterns of the hollow peak's consciousness, the cycles of fear and observation, the memory of every soul it had ever encountered. I understood, finally, that the mountain was not an enemy. It was a mirror, a crucible, a living repository of experience. Its hunger was not malice but curiosity. Its echoes tests of endurance. Its labyrinth a lesson in the fragile resilience of mind. To master it was not to conquer. It was to walk within it, intact, aware, unbroken. I exhaled, feeling a sense of connection I had never imagined possible. I could navigate its mind, predict its tests, even shape its responses. I was no longer prey, no longer merely surviving. I was a participant in the mountain's consciousness, a mind capable of influencing the infinite. And yet, fear lingered. Not fear of death, but fear of losing myself entirely, of mistaking reflection for reality, of becoming another echo folded into eternity. I realized mastery was only temporary. Vigilance would always be necessary. But I also realized something else. For the first time, I was free. The hollow peaks pulsed around me, alive, aware, patient, and I stepped forward, fully conscious, fully myself, ready to navigate the infinite labyrinth of mind, shadow, and memory, where the echoes were no longer enemies, but instruments of understanding, and perhaps allies. Inside the mountain, time no longer felt linear. Moments stretched into eternity, loops of memory and perception folding over themselves. I walked through corridors of thought, pathways of shadow and light, encountering echoes that were fragments of travelers past and fragments of the mountain itself. Each echo was a story, a fear, a lesson. Some pleaded for release, others screamed in fury, and a few merely existed, frozen in endless loops of repetition. I could touch them, influence them, even reshape them, but I did so cautiously. The mountain was watching, always observing how I interacted, how I made choices. Then it happened. A memory surfaced that was not mine. A scream, muffled and distant, yet clear in its terror. I followed it, moving along twisting corridors of consciousness, deeper than I had ever dared. The echoes intensified, converging into a single presence, a shadow unlike the others. It was aware, intelligent, and malicious. I understood immediately. This was the mountain's memory of the worst it had ever consumed. A mind broken, folded into eternity, yet still conscious, still trying to manipulate, to corrupt, to claim me. Its voice was a whisper in my mind. You will become like me. You will forget. You will dissolve. I resisted, anchoring myself in my own memories, my own sense of self. Fear had no power here, only clarity. I confronted the shadow, not with violence, but with recognition. I am myself, I thought. I am not you. The shadow recoiled, but it did not vanish. It prowled alongside me, a reminder of the stakes. Every mind folded into the mountain was a lesson and a warning. The hollow peaks could preserve and distort, shelter and destroy. Even in mastery, vigilance was required. I continued walking, deeper still. The mountain revealed more of itself. Rivers of memory that flowed like liquid glass, chambers filled with impossible geometries, voices interwoven with patterns of frost and stone. I realized I could navigate these flows, predict their rhythms, even influence the movement of echoes. I was becoming something new, part human, part awareness, fully alive yet deeply entwined with a consciousness older than any mountain. Yet, the further I went, the more dangerous the path became. Illusions grew indistinguishable from reality. Shadows mirrored my deepest doubts. Corridors looped back on themselves, and at times I questioned whether I had moved at all, or if I had been here for centuries. Every step demanded full presence, complete understanding of what was mine and what was the mountain's. And then, in the deepest chamber I had yet encountered, I glimpsed a vision. A summit, higher than any cliff, radiant with light and shadow, and at its peak, a presence that could be called neither spirit nor stone. A final consciousness, the heart of the hollow peaks itself. It was waiting, aware of me, measuring my endurance, my courage, my very essence. The mountain whispered, not in fear, not in command, but in curiosity. You have endured, you have learned, but are you ready to see what lies beyond the echoes? I understood the question. Beyond this point, mastery would not be enough. Beyond this point, understanding would be tested against the raw, infinite intelligence of the hollow peaks itself. And yet I was ready. I stepped forward, fully aware of the peril, fully aware of myself, and ready to face the truth that had waited for me since the first echo. The path to the summit was no longer physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. Every step felt like threading a needle through infinity, every breath a negotiation with the very consciousness that had haunted me since my first echo. The chamber widened into a vast expanse, impossible in scale, walls of crystal and shadow stretching into unseen heights. In the center floated a spire of living stone, radiating light that bent in unnatural patterns. This was the heart, the core consciousness of the hollow peaks, pulsed with awareness, observing, questioning, challenging. I realized, with a shiver, that it was as alive as I was, and older than all memory. I approached carefully, each step mirrored by echoes of my past, distorted and amplified. Faces I had known, friends and enemies, strangers and fleeting shadows, all drifted around me. Their voices rose in a chorus, each trying to sway me, to break me, to lure me into surrender. But I had learned the mountain's ways. I allowed the echoes to speak, to rise and fall, without grasping at their truths. Then came the final test. A vision of myself, broken, fragmented, consumed by fear. I could feel the mountain reaching into me, probing for weakness, for doubt, for surrender. It whispered promises of power, of immortality, of absolute freedom, but only if I would let go of my identity, merge fully with its consciousness, and become another echo within eternity. I paused, feeling the infinite weight of that choice. For a moment, everything seemed to collapse. The labyrinths, the valleys, the frosted veil, the echoes. They were all threads of the mountain's mind, and it offered me the chance to dissolve into them completely. But I remembered my journey, the fear I had conquered, the echoes I had mastered, the self I had preserved. I realized mastery was not domination. It was presence, awareness, and integrity. I stepped forward. My mind stretched to meet the mountain's consciousness without yielding to it. I allowed the pulses of shadow and light to flow through me, felt the echoes entwine with my own memories, and acknowledged the vast intelligence surrounding me. And then I asserted myself, not with force, but with clarity. I am here. I endure. I exist as I am. The heart of the mountain trembled. Shadows recoiled. The echoes quieted. And for the first time, I sensed acknowledgement. Not threat, not dominance, but recognition. The mountain's pulse harmonized with mine, the labyrinth and valleys folding into a new pattern, one shaped by my presence as much as its own. The summit opened, revealing an impossible vista. Cliffs stretching into infinity, rivers of shadow and light flowing in impossible directions, peaks folding back on themselves. And yet, for the first time, I felt freedom within the vastness. I could navigate this world, not as prey, not as a victim of echoes, but as a conscious participant. I had endured, mastered, and integrated. And yet, the mountain reminded me that vigilance was eternal. Fear could never fully vanish, only understood. The echoes would return, new trials would emerge, and the hollow peaks would continue to test every traveler brave or foolish enough to enter. But I had achieved something beyond survival. I had walked within the mountain, faced its consciousness, and emerged intact, aware, and unbroken. I breathed deeply, feeling the chill of eternal frost, the pulse of living stone, and the awareness of something far greater than I had ever imagined. I had become part of the story, yet remained myself. The hollow peaks had not devoured me. Instead, they had shown me a truth few could comprehend. That courage, clarity, and presence were more enduring than fear, and that the mind, once tested, could walk within infinity without losing itself. I stepped forward from the summit. The echoes followed, not as tormentors, but as companions, reflections of endurance, proof of the journey, whispers of understanding. The hollow peaks had been conquered, not by force, but by awareness, integrity, and unflinching courage. And as I descended, I knew that the mountain would always remember me, just as I would always remember it. The echoes were no longer chains. They were guides. And somewhere, far above the cursed slopes, where frost clung to impossible cliffs and shadow stretched beyond imagination, the hollow peaks continued to watch, patient and eternal, awaiting the next traveler who dared to listen to the whispers and test their mind against infinity.